Legend of the Order of Steel. A long time ago, in old Europa, when Charles the Terrible was just another petty prince of Gaul, when the only thing that outnumbered the troubles facing everyone was the possible solutions. In this old place, there was an order of knights, known as the Order of Steel. They were loyal to no one kingdom, nor to any one king, nor to any one god, nor any one philosophy, nor even loyal to any one species. Many powerful royals loved the Order of Steel for being protectors of everyone, while many other royals hated them for protecting everyone. Sometimes a royal would hate them one day and then love them another. Still, the tale we share is a tale of 3 villages who sought out the Order's help. The first village to seek out their help was the human village of Het. Built where the forest met the mountains, they were facing trouble from bandits. Not just any bandits, though. Those bold enough to strike into the village proper during the night, and when any of the militia tried to strike at them, they would disappear into smoke. So, the village mayor traveled for many days to seek out help from the Order of Steel, because she didn't have the money to approach any other order of knights, nor did she want to petition a king who didn't even know that her village existed. So, she asked for an audience with Knight Commander Decuma, the leader of the order. Decuma, whose name means present, listened to the village mayor's plea. She listened closely, and she listened about the crimes of the bandits. She agreed to send one knight to the village of Het for assistance. At first the mayor thought this was insane. No one knight could take on all these bandits, but Decuma promised. One knight would be all that it took. So, the human mayor went outside, waiting for her knight to appear. The next emissary to come was a diplomat of the fairy village, loyal to the court of summer. Humans had been capturing fairies that had been leaving the village, and now they were too scared to go out. This brave diplomat approached the order, hoping that they would have something to offer, but he worried he wouldn't be able to return. So Decuma listened, and she agreed that the fairies would need help. So she agreed to send to them a different knight. At first the fairy thought this was insane, but they reluctantly agreed. After all, even one knight would be better than none, correct? And when the fairy left, waiting for her champion to appear, the final emissary came. A mighty giant, one of the shortest of her kind, at merely 10 feet tall, walked into the great hall. There, they kneeled before Decuma and explained their situation. Giants had been disappearing into the night, and now that the village matriarch of the giants needed some kind of assistance. They weren't strong practitioners of magic, and they didn't know what possibly could have been threatening them. Decuma listened, and she agreed. She would send one knight to help the giants. The giants thought this was madness. Surely whatever could take on giants was more than strong enough for a single knight. But again, the giants reluctantly agreed. So the last emissary waited outside. With the emissaries outside, Knight Commander Decuma called up 3 knights, one to send to each village. First, she called upon Azam the Mighty, one of the oldest knights of the order, whose primary weapon was a shepherd's crook larger than a tree was tall. She gave Azam very clear directions on what to do, and he agreed that it was a good plan. So, he went outside to find his emissary and to travel to their village with them. Next came a human soldier, Eclipse, one of the wisest of the knights of the order. Decuma gave sealed orders to Eclipse. Eclipse opened it and read it thoroughly. When they fully understood, they agreed with Decuma's plan and left to go find their emissary. The final knight to enter the great hall was one of the smallest of the order. At merely 7 inches tall, Half Silversting was a fairy of the court of Winter. She was a vassal to over 13 different kingdoms, and possibly one of the fiercest warriors there. Decuma gave strict orders to this fairy, and explained what was needed to be done. Reluctantly, Half agreed, and agreed not to kill too many people. So she left to go find her emissary. Azam arrived in the village of the humans with the village mayor, carrying her in his hands. The human mayor was a bit confused by the idea of a giant knight, but did agree that it would only take one of such knights to protect the entire village. So, Azam helped them set up their defenses. They would nail up their windows and make sure that their doors were sealed, and he would wait outside that night to keep them safe. So, with his dark cloak covering his face and sitting completely still in the center of the village, Azam waited for the bandits to approach. Not far after nightfall, he saw a group of small humans approach from the woods. They had with them many knives and a dog, while they searched through the village. It was clear they were looking for something, but it wasn't clear what they were looking for. Still, it wouldn't take Azam much to disrupt them. Lifting up his crook and being quiet, he snuck up behind them and then took them by surprise. Knocking them down by slamming his crook hard into the ground, they fell like the earth was shaking. When they turned and saw that the knight was there, in shock he threw a small bag on the ground, allowing them to disappear into smoke. But it didn't take Azam long to find them. Whatever trick they used, they could only do it once that night, and Azam, finding his prey, picked them up on the crook and hung them from the trees. While they were hanging from the trees, he demanded that they tell him where the stolen goods were. One of the bandits led them to their camp, where they had been stealing the goods for a long time, hiding them into a chest marked with a lambda. Azam took the stolen items and returned them to the village, keeping all the bandits prisoners for the humans to do what they wanted with them. Though Azam is one of the oldest knights of the Order of Steel, he had yet to take a single life, and he still hasn't. Half of the Court of Winter traveled with the giants to their village. When she approached the emissary thought that the knight was merely invisible. But no. After much explanation and patience, she understood that the knight was in front of her, just very small. She thought it was a joke, but decided against it, and led Half to the village of the giants, which lay deep in the mountains. In the village, Half explained her plan to the matriarch of the giants, who, reluctantly, agreed that it was a good plan. That very same night, a song was carried throughout the giants' village. And while the song carried, 3 giants left their homes and followed it. Half, careful in her stealth, followed them, listening to the melody but not compelled by its magic. As she traveled along throughout most of the night, she found a clearing deep in a hidden valley, and in that hidden valley was all the other giants, kept down by iron chains that were connected to the mountains themselves. In the center of the clearing was a Laconian mage. Using an enchanted flute, she called upon the giants to follow her. Now knowing where the threat was, Half flew towards her. In the night, she was sure that her small size would not be seen. And she was correct. So, as she traveled towards the Laconian mage, she stood on their shoulder, and then pressed her blade into the neck, gently beginning to push her blade into the skin. "Release the giants now, or I will kill you." The Laconian mage merely chuckled. "You cannot kill me. After all, you're too small." But Half responded with a loud laugh. "Bold assumption. I bet you didn't know my blade was poisoned." The Laconian mage felt a drop of blood fall from her nose. She recognized the poison, and she knew she would be dead within minutes if she didn't have the antidote. So, she released all the giants from her spell, then released the iron chains. "Now tell me, fairy, where is the antidote?" she said. Half flew in front of the Laconian mage, tucking her sword away. Then she shrugged. "I don't carry antidote for my poisons. I'm afraid you're already dead." The Laconian mage, hearing those final words, felt her heart stop. And with her heart stopped, she fell to the ground, and her enchanted flute was shattered. Leading the giants now back to the village, Half told the matriarch all that had happened, and they were thankful for their freedom thanks to the small fairy. So, they agreed to give her a small portion of their lands. Now she was a vassal over 14 kingdoms. In the final village, the village of the fairies deep in the forest, Eclipse followed the emissary. But it was difficult. The woods were heavy, and the trees were thick. Traveling through, hearing the whispers of the leaves and the distant howl of the moon, Eclipse finally found the village, with the emissary's help. So, Eclipse explained the Knight Commander's plan to the Prince of the Fairies. He agreed that it was a good plan, and he would keep his people safe while Eclipse did it. So, that day, the fairies waited in the village, while Eclipse went out into the night to go dig holes. That night, that very same night, when the Azam the Mighty and half Silversting were taking on their prey, Eclipse took on theirs. A group of humans with a lambda on their chest approached the fairy village, armed with iron cages and little bell jars that contained the captured fairies. Whatever their plan, it looks like they needed more of the fairies captured. So, Eclipse waited in the tree branches, watching them go by and get closer and closer to the village, when finally there was a snap and they fell into a hole. The hole was 10 feet deep and 20 feet wide. At the bottom, the thieves who stole fairies were there. They called out for help, and Eclipse approached the trench. They offered a ladder, but only if they released all the fairies first. They agreed, releasing the fairies, who then flew out of the hole, and Eclipse, satisfied that they had seen all the missing fairies now, agreed to let down a ladder. They let down a ladder and then disappeared behind a tree again. This time, when those with iron cages rose up, now recognized as Laconians, trying to capture fairies to become helots, Eclipse watched, waiting to see if the Laconians would walk away or if they would continue to head to the village. And sure enough, they continued their walk towards the fairy village. This time they fell in an even deeper hole, one that was 40 feet wide and 20 feet deep. This time, when they called for help, Eclipse did not answer. They simply walked with the fairies back to the fairy village. By the time the sun rose up over that pit, there would be no Laconians alive in the bottom. Now in the village of the fairies, the prince thanked the knight for their hard work, and all 3 villages that day agreed to give their support towards the Order of Steel. All three villages, saved by one not their own, had now grown closer, even though he didn't yet know it. And Decuma, the Knight Commander, knew that a new threat was rising. If the Laconians were willing to steal from humans, were willing to capture the giants and the fairies, then clearly they would have a reason for it. After all, no one builds an army unless they are planning for war. Thank you for listening to this legend. Have a good rest of your night.